Hello, everybody, and welcome to this webinar titled Know Your Adversaries and Where They Trade to Stop Cyber Attacks. I think the next, it's going to be a good 40 minutes or so. We're going to talk about the cyber underground, what it's like, how you can collect cyber threat intelligence from the cyber underground, and how this helps you stay secure. And then we'll look at some popular use cases and tales from the trenches, and finish up with ensuring how you get the most out of your CTI. So, without further ado, let's get started. So, we'll start by setting the scene. Who are Intel 471 anyway? And before we get started on how you can use CTI, what is the cyber underground actually like? So, who are we? Well, it won't come as a big surprise. We're a cyber threat intelligence company collecting two types of intelligence in what we call the cyber underground. And we'll talk a little bit more about what the cyber underground is actually like in the next couple of slides, because there's some misconceptions there that we think it is important to address. But at the core, we collect adversary intelligence, which focuses on actor communications, and malware intelligence, where we are tracking malware infrastructures and analyzing what they are doing, who they're targeting, and how they are developing and moving. We do this, we take this raw intelligence and look at it through a couple of different lenses, such as focusing on vulnerabilities, looking at stolen credentials, but also tracking actors and, of course, the malware infrastructures. We turn this into intelligence and make this available to our customers around the globe. Now, to do this, we follow what we call a boots on the ground model. This may sound a bit odd, because basically boots on the ground means we have analysts and researchers dotted around the globe who are focused on tracking adversaries and tracking actor communications. And at first glance, that may seem a bit odd, because this is cyber threat intelligence, and that should mean that you can do it from anywhere in the world. However, we've found that to kind of be able to insert ourselves into actor communications and into conversations and have the best chance of gaining access to the most closed off parts, you need not just excellent language skills. It will come as no surprise that not every single cyber actor speaks English. Quite the opposite, in fact, but also that you need to have excellent local knowledge, cultural knowledge, and it has to be up to date, because otherwise you tend to stick out. And when you stick out, it becomes really difficult to blend into the background. So you could do all of this from an air-conditioned office in New York, and we have nothing against air-conditioned offices, but we found that the best way to do this is to actually be located in the same geographic area as the actors that you're tracking. We call it boots on the ground, and it means we have teams dotted around the globe on every single continent, with the exception of Antarctica, tracking the cyber actors in that region. And the reason we do that, and the whole point of cyber threat intelligence, is to help our customers become more proactive when it comes to mitigating cyber risk. So in this slide, you can see over on the left is a reactive approach where you focus solely on yourself and your own attack surface. But then as you start to get more proactive, we see organizations starting to look beyond their own perimeter and maybe start looking at their sector. So in order to get ahead of what's coming your way, instead of waiting for it to turn up at your perimeter, organizations start looking at other organizations like themselves or located in the same industry, the same vertical, the same region, to see what threats or what they're seeing, to act as kind of an advanced warning. When you take that to its logical conclusion, you can actually look outside anyone's perimeter and actually start tracking the adversaries that are out there. Quite often it starts with a focus on infrastructure, so tracking malware, botnets, and campaigns. But if you focus solely on technical indicators, again, the amount of advanced warning you'll get, the ability to be proactive is actually somewhat limited. There is a way to be even more proactive, and also you're missing a lot of context. If you're solely focused on technical indicators, what it's hard to discern is what the actual purpose is behind the attack that you're seeing. Behind that infrastructure sits an actor, and that actor is trying to accomplish something. They're trying to do something. And maybe what you're seeing is only one part of a much bigger whole. And once you understand the entirety of it, it becomes much more obvious how you can move out of harm's way, what you can do to mitigate that risk. And that is where a focus on adversary intelligence, or actually focusing on the actors behind the infrastructure, comes in. Focusing on actor communications, finding where these actors ply their trade, where they hang out, where they communicate with others, where they buy and sell the kind of the bits they need to launch their attacks, or the results of that attack. All of that helps you understand much deeper as to what is actually going on and how you can best mitigate or move to the side of it, move out of harm's way, as it were. It also allows you to get the most advanced warning and be the most proactive when it comes to mitigating cyber risk. And that is the whole purpose of intelligence, to be more proactive and to get ahead of the threat. Now, we'll start, and I've mentioned the cyber underground a couple of times in this. So I think it's only right that we now can take a closer look at what the cyber underground is actually like, and also why this allows us to actually collect cyber threat intelligence, which is a good thing. I've put up a picture of an iceberg, and this is kind of the psychological experiment where people ask you not to think of an elephant while showing you a picture of an elephant. I'm showing you a picture of an iceberg. What I want you to do, though, is not think of an iceberg, because the cyber underground is absolutely not like an iceberg. The idea behind the iceberg picture is the bit you can see, the bit that's sticking above the water, that is the open internet, and yet what is underwater is much bigger, and that's where the real danger lies. You've also heard me refer to it as the cyber underground. Another word that is a term that is often used is the deep and dark web. And that is defined as what is underneath, under the water with the iceberg, is anything that you cannot easily get to. And it is bigger than the open internet. If this were really true, we would be in a lot of trouble. And it isn't true. And anybody who talks in this imagery of icebergs and a dark web, it's not only wrong, it's actively unhelpful. It prevents you from understanding what is actually going on. And the reason it's wrong, and we should be glad that it's wrong, is if you think it through, it takes a company the size of Google to try and index the open internet. If we are serious that the actual dark web or the underground is bigger than the open internet, we're in a lot of trouble. We need several companies the size of Google to make sense of it. And that's a challenge. Thankfully, this is not what it's actually like. And there's a very specific reason for that. And understanding that reason makes you understand why you can actually collect meaningful cyber threat intelligence, because it has to do with the fundamental way that how the threats that we are faced with actually work. And the fundamental thing is that, and a misunderstanding, is that people think that the threats that we are faced with are the work of a single actor or a single group of actors, when, as a matter of fact, this is not the case. The threats that we are faced with are not the work of a single actor or a group of actors. It's groups of groups working together in flexible and changing partnerships. It's actually like a business value chain or a business process. It's like the traditional business chains or supplier and vendor relationship that we see all around us. Each actor or each group is actually a small part of a bigger whole, and they profit in some way of being a part of this value chain. Now, the key thing here is groups of groups working together in ever-changing partnerships. What this means, and if we think about it, a very deep and dark web wouldn't be very beneficial to them, because what follows from this very fundamental truth is that actors are continuously looking for other actors or other groups to work with, people to partner with. And a very deep and dark web doesn't actually benefit that. So the actual cyber underground is not deep and dark. It's actually more like a marketplace. It is small in size and it is structured, and there is a lot of communications and interactions happening in it because actors are forming these new partnerships, these new alliances, these new customer, kind of supplier and customer relationships. So the underground is small in size. It is structured because it is the actors that inhabit it that create that structure. And that means that we can map out that structure. We can track these actor interactions. We can kind of insert ourselves into this marketplace, and we can map out which actors, what they're engaged in, what they're doing, what they're offering, what the capabilities of the products or the services that they're offering are. And so we can work out the ingredients that go into the threats that our customers are concerned about. When we look and map the cyber underground, with the things that we find usually go into one of three buckets. It's either products, services, or goods. Products being something you buy and own. So for instance, malware, software, a phishing kit that you can purchase online and then use. Services are where we have software products in kind of the real world. The underground has the concept of hosted services as well. So one interesting one is bulletproof hosting, which is basically underground hosters that promise that no matter what you host with them, no matter who gets angry, that infrastructure, that server will stay up. They will simply not honor any abuse complaints. You can get malware as a service. You can rent exploit kits. Goods are kind of the intangibles. They are the end results of certain value chains. So stolen credit card data, account credentials, stolen data, for instance, are all kind of the intangible goods that people trade in. For some, they are the end result of what they do. If you run InfoStealer malware that steals credentials, then stolen account credentials are the end result of all your efforts. For other actors, they're actually the very start. For instance, ransomware. If you want to gain access to a company in order to deploy ransomware and hold them to ransom, then it very often starts off with stolen credentials. So the goods are the end point for some and the starting point for others. But the key concept here is the underground is like a marketplace where there's a lot of actor interactions happening between actors who are trying to form partnerships, who are buying and selling and talking and discussing and planning products, services, and goods. And we can insert ourselves into those conversations. We can join in, and that is how you can gain a lot of insights and intelligence. So how does CTI help? We've talked about how the idea is to make you be more proactive when it comes to mitigating risk. This is a fairly short section. Basically, we want to look at the key thing, kind of the key ways that CTI can help, and then dive into some of the use cases. Now, the first thing is that, interestingly enough, intelligence by itself doesn't actually do a single thing. What it does do is it informs decisions, it supports decisions, and it is those decisions that actually lead to outcomes. So the idea is just receiving intelligence doesn't make you any safer. It is how you use that intelligence. And the idea behind that is you use it to support decisions. These can be, and we'll get to this, but can be very strategic decisions, but they can also be very tactical decisions. And they don't have to actually be human decisions. They can be decisions made by components in your infrastructure, for instance. Will I allow this connection? Will I block this connection? Do we allow this piece of software to run? Do we block this piece of software from running? But it can also mean what will be the key areas from a security architecture perspective that we want to focus on for the next 2 years, for instance. What are the long-term threats that we need to be aware of? All of these are examples of cases where having the right intelligence can help you make the right decisions, which in turn lead to better security. So if we look at decision levels and cyber threat intelligence, if intelligence drives decisions, then we have decisions at different levels. We have the strategical, the operational, and the tactical. And CTI can be applied at all these different layers as well. You can apply it at the strategic level, the operational, and the tactical level. If you're looking at the kind of the phases of cybersecurity, I've taken this comes from NIST, the American NIST Institute. Broadly speaking, there are 3 phases of cybersecurity: prevent, detect, and respond. NIST actually takes these and splits them into further subsections, starting identify, protect, detect, respond, and recover. But CTI can help with all of these. And obviously, the old saying is an ounce of an apple a day keeps the doctor away, or an ounce of prevention is worth much more than cure. So in the identify and mostly in the protect phases is, of course, a great phase to apply CTI. One of the things that's rather unique about intelligence is that it always has an outside-in view. As CTI specialists, you basically have your back to the organization. You're not looking at an organization or an infrastructure itself. As a matter of fact, you have your back. You're looking at all of the outside world, everything beyond the horizon. That is what you focus on. Another interesting thing, of course, is that CTI, and certainly the adversary intelligence, is directly engaged with tracking the other side, the actors that are actually launching this. And engagement means that you can do this before, during, and after an incident. So it adds another capability to your response. One of your responses could be that you try and engage with the actor to try and find out more information, which allows you to better mitigate, respond, or recover from the incident, for instance. So what are some use cases? What are some use cases where you can use CTI? And then we'll look at some of the examples of how organizations can use cyber underground intelligence to help mitigate risk. And we'll also look at some counterexamples, some examples where what happens if you pass up this opportunity, and what can happen if you don't use CTI. So here's a broad overview of kind of the various types of use cases that we see. And these cut across all the different phases. So from preventing to detecting to responding, from strategic to operational to tactical. But you can use it for network perimeter protection. So basically, one of the key use cases there is malicious traffic detection. The idea is, from tracking malware infrastructures and from tracking actors, you're able to distill an enormous amount of technical data that you can actually use within your infrastructure. The idea here is it is much easier to find something if you actually already know what you're looking for. So one of the ways that CTI can help is that it can make existing security solutions be much more effective and efficient by feeding them with intelligence which supports the automated decisions that they're making. We can talk a lot about the various types of threats that we see, but I alluded to it earlier. There's an enormous underground ecosystem based around stolen credentials because in quite a lot of attacks are about trying to gain access to things actors really shouldn't have access to. These can be people's bank accounts, it can be network infrastructures. So basically what they're trying to do is they're trying to either steal credentials or impersonate people, impersonate valid users in some way to gain access to things they shouldn't. So another use case focuses around identity and access management, looking for compromised credentials, dealing with them before they come to any harm, looking at account takeover attacks and making sure that you're mitigating those. For instance, brute forcing attacks where people just try many, many different passwords to gain access. Next is risk and compliance, looking at things like insider threat. This is one of the ones that's been rising over the years. A lot of actors have decided one of the best ways to gain access is to kind of bypass the technical completely and just try and find an insider. So you see actors advertising for insiders, promising people money or other rewards if they will help them. But also, this is where tracking breaches. Actors will sell access to organizations, for instance, or networks, infrastructures in the underground, offering access for sale. So if you see evidence that a breach is occurring because of these activities, you can respond to that and deal with that. Security operations, incident response, whenever you're dealing with an incident, the ability to have kind of additional context additional information about what's going on, that outside-in perspective, maybe what the actor is seeing, what they're reporting back, for instance, to others they're engaged with. Threat hunting, which is basically the assumption that an organization has already been breached. They just don't know it yet. But threat hunters' job is to kind of comb through log files, looking for the telltale kind of small fingerprints that something has indeed happened. Obviously, in order to do that, it's very critical that you know what those fingerprints or what those telltale signs would actually be. So very accurate and up-to-date knowledge of the tools and the techniques and the procedures that the actors that you believe may be targeting you would have used is key in that. System integrity, a key area there is vulnerability patch management. One of the things that we've been hearing for a number of years, which is why we've developed some solutions around this particular use case, is that organizations are struggling with patching, and not just struggling in that sense that you think that there's things to patch, but it takes us too long to get permission to patch because people are afraid that the mere act of patching may cause an impact. No, it's actually already the amount of the patches that can be applied. That number is already bigger than the capacity for organizations to apply them. So it boils down to that, say we have more to patch than we can, and so we have to prioritize. And interestingly, that is where CTI, cyber threat intelligence, can help by tracking, for instance, what the vulnerabilities are that actors are about to start exploiting. Now, the whole area of fraud, if you're in the financial services sector, in retail, for instance, and retail in the broader sense, it could be e-commerce, it could be digital services delivery, etc. Then fraud is a major headache. So things like fraud prevention, people trying to use stolen data, people trying to abuse your brand, for instance, and all of the use cases we've talked about so far apply to the organization itself, but you can also use that in a third-party risk management scenario. So basically, instead of looking at yourself, you can apply all this cyber threat intelligence to key suppliers. You can see if you know that key third parties, for instance, have key vulnerabilities. And if you know, if you're aware that they have certain vulnerabilities that need to be patched, you can help them make sure that they're patching the ones that have the highest priority. You can monitor the underground for evidence that someone has breached one of your key third parties or is about to breach one of your key third parties, for instance, because there are compromised credentials floating around. So this is kind of a generic overview of some of the ways in which, and this is not by no means an exhaustive list, but these are scenarios and use cases for which we've developed specific approaches and products. And I only have 30 minutes, so I can't go through all of them, but we'll look at some examples of how our customers are using adversary and malware intelligence in some of these use cases that we've outlined here. We'll start off with one. We'll start off with number one. And we'll start at the beginning, malicious traffic detection. One of our customers is a global telecommunications company. And what they do is they basically ingest a lot of very technical feeds. And we're talking at things like for bulletproof hosters. If you know the IP addresses that they are running their infrastructure on, meaning anything that a bulletproof hoster is hosting will be located on one of those IPs, and it is only that bulletproof hoster that uses that IP, then this is one of those things that you can very easily block. You can block all connections to those IP addresses. You can track which domains are being hosted there, and you can also you can then be very sure that those domains are malicious as well. When you track malware, for instance, they have command and control servers, C2 servers. Again, you can find out the locations, the URLs where the C2s are being hosted, and again, use this to identify malware inside the network. Same for file names or hashes for malware that is being dropped. We track hundreds and well in excess of 100 and close to 200 different malware families, thousands and thousands of instances of those families and variants of them, tracking them fully continuously. So every type of activity that emanates from the command and control servers, the instructions, the commands that they're issuing, we are intercepting, capturing, and basically analyzing, which means that quite often malware is actually used to drop other malware. We'll see some examples of this later on. And so when we capture these commands, where basically a C2 server is instructing malware to drop additional malware, you can grab what they're trying to drop and analyze that and push out the file names and the hashes, etc. So basically, they're using all this technical data, and they use that to detect malicious traffic. That could be connections to malicious IP addresses, to known C2 servers, an endpoint trying to execute a piece of software where we've actually captured that and said, this is actually malware. And they do that both at the perimeter, inside the network, and on the endpoints. And they're doing that using existing security products that they already have. So the idea is this is an instance where the application of cyber threat intelligence, specifically a lot of the malware intelligence and the malicious traffic intelligence that we have, can be used to make your existing security products more efficient and more effective. The nice thing about this is it's a fairly, these feeds are actually not that large. They're not massive when compared to certain other feeds. They are of a manageable size, and they have no false positives. All of this comes from known malicious infrastructures. There's no gray area here. This is all known malicious infrastructure. So because it's fairly limited in size, it doesn't overwhelm existing products. It isn't a feed that is so big, for instance, that your endpoint security products slow to a crawl. Or that your firewalls completely slow down because they have such humongous block lists to work with. This is actually quite manageable. And because there are no false positives, it also doesn't generate any incidents where your infrastructure ends up blocking access to things that it really shouldn't. So, but at the same time, it helps to block a very broad category of threats before they can do any harm. Very simply, because basically the mere act of connecting to a bulletproof hoster where a lot of this stuff is hosted is immediately blocked. So whatever was going to come after this doesn't actually get an opportunity to execute. The second example is one of breach monitoring, and in this particular example, we've got it's a European company active across the globe in the financial services sector. And we detected an underground actor offering access for sale to a remote access, a legitimate way that their employees were accessing in kind of the organization network remotely. Now, as always, the access offers this for sale. And a quick initial investigation by the company said that they thought it was very unlikely that this offer was actually genuine, because they believe that they were using MFA as standard across all of their remote access functionality. However, we told them that the actor has a very good reputation, and usually when they offer something, the offer is legitimate. And so there was they kind of decided based on that to do some further investigation, and discovered, and this is the kind of the joys of working in an international company with many local operations, that a couple of their local operations actually hadn't deployed MFA, and they were using static passwords, so single-factor authentication. As a result, as a precautionary measure, they suspended all that access. They basically got their local operation to stop all these accounts, and quite soon afterwards, our engagement with the actor revealed that they said that the access was lost, which both confirmed that the initial offer had been legitimate, and also confirmed that this fix had worked. Now, in general, stolen credentials and access for sale is a huge underground market. And so breach monitoring, stolen credential monitoring is actually a very good way to mitigate risk. There are lots and lots of attacks that actually require or start off with someone using stolen credentials to gain access to infrastructure. The third example, continuing that example, actually is one of credential monitoring. This example is a US-based multinational. They're actually a cybersecurity product vendor. And so they take cybersecurity very serious themselves. What they receive is a feed of compromised credentials that we've detected either for sale or being published in the underground that might belong to them, that basically are their credentials. And what they have is an automated process which basically compares the stolen credential and checks if there's actually a corresponding live corporate account, or are there any types of corresponding live corporate accounts. And if there are, now, and the reason you do that is because some of the credentials may be stale, they're old, there's a lot of reuse going on, kind of depends on the particular collection or the particular type of credential that you're getting. And so they first see if they're new, and then they check if they actually belong to a user who is still with the company. And if it does, they immediately block, notify the user, and investigate. So kind of trying to analyze how is this a corporate credential? And remember, it doesn't actually have to be a corporate credential, or not remember, because of the problem of password reuse. People often reuse passwords, and so they may have reused the corporate password somewhere else. The password may have been captured. So out of an abundance of caution, they investigate, they try and find out how this credential came to be AWOL, as it were. And this automated process really helps them get on top and prevents the impact from abuse of stolen accounts. So another example focused around credentials. The fourth example is actually about third-party risk management. This customer is a European company in the banking sector, and they actually use underground intelligence to help determine the risks when they're onboarding new suppliers. So it's kind of an addition to quite often you see organizations using kind of self-assessment forms to kind of help them assess the risk associated with a new supplier, a new vendor, for instance. But you can also use what's available in the underground to help determine if there is an increased risk around a new vendor or a new supplier. So you can do a historical look back to see, is there currently access for sale? Has access ever been sold? Is there any evidence of leaked or stolen data being offered for sale in the underground? Are there compromised credentials being offered for sale for that organization? If so, how many, or the sources? There are so many kind of email addresses and breaches of some sort. For instance, in 2012, there's a huge breach at LinkedIn. So if you find employees from that company, their 2012 LinkedIn credentials, by itself, in and of itself, that doesn't mean a lot. So you want to look at how many. Is it more or less than you would expect for a company of this size or in this sector? The sources, the freshness, etc., kind of make a determination. But if there's an unusual spike there, that may mean that there is a heightened risk there. And again, is anybody offering vulnerabilities for sale for that company? And they also continuously monitor the same data points for their existing suppliers, as well as, of course, fairly obvious if there is actual evidence of a breach. And talking about breach detection, an interesting example there, because it's kind of you find the very broad range of actors involved in selling access to organizations. And one interesting example is Iranian or Persian language actors in the underground, and a number of them actually had links to the Iranian nation state. And a lot of these actors are prolific sellers of network access, and they kind of stood out because of the targets they were selling access to, kind of the victims that they had, mostly targeting the US and Europe, but a specific focus on the defense and aerospace sector, as well as kind of industry and the hospitality sector as well, so hotels, airlines, etc. We've linked a number of these actors to the Iranian Mabna Institute, which has been associated with Iranian nation-state campaigns. And what these actors are doing is they are monetizing the results of nation-state activities. Now, some of our customers who've seen evidence of breaches there, or organizations that we've reached out to and said, we want to let you know that someone is making an offer of selling access. We have had reports back that, in general, these accesses are actually genuine. The offers are genuine. The actors do appear to have some sort of access. So this is something you should take seriously. But interestingly, it seems to be one way for these actors that they're monetizing the results of the activities that they've been up to while in the employ of a nation state. And then another example for third-party risk, but this is actually one where it comes from looking back rather after the fact. So in February of this year, Toyota was forced to shut down 14 factories for 24 hours after one of their suppliers suffered a ransomware attack, which meant they couldn't supply kind of the parts to the factories, and so Toyota had to shut down the factories because the production line couldn't continue. Now, this happened in February. Between December of 2021 and the supplier in question was a company called Kojima, and between December of 2021 and March of 2022, our malware intelligence detected about 500 events from send spam commands from the Emotet malware targeting or using Kojima email addresses. So a couple of months prior to the actual incident at Kojima, it seems that there was that Emotet started sending out spam messages which were targeting or somehow associated or trying to target Kojima, which it was the supplier that got hit in this ransomware incident. And Emotet is an interesting piece of malware. It is used to blast out spam, but it has also been used by a number of groups. It's used to blast out spam, but it's also used. These spam messages often install additional malware, and a couple of ransomware groups actually used it as their initial attack vector. So you would have spam messages sent out by Emotet, and if you actually click on the link in the spam, this would deploy either a remote access toolkit or another piece of malware that would give ransomware actors access to your infrastructure, and then a ransomware incident would begin. So it is, if you see key suppliers, if you see key third parties suddenly appearing in these spam templates, that is an indicator, and a good indicator that there's something going on, and that it's worth, for instance, reaching out to them and making sure that they're aware of this, and of course kind of assessing whether they're able to deal with that, if they have good enough controls in place to make sure that nothing will slip through. So example number 7, this is actually a couple of slides, but talking about vulnerability patch management. Very interesting topic. And the idea is there's a recurring thing that you keep hearing in news articles again and again and again. You hear about breaches, or you hear reports about analysis of breaches happening. And time again, the theme is the same. It is that attackers are exploiting old or unpatched, known unpatched vulnerabilities that are years old. And the underlying message is very simple. And let's just say it's not entirely unjustified. Let me be the first to say that. But the underlying one is, it's shame on the victims for not patching sooner. How can you have been basically breached by a vulnerability that is years and years old? Well, there's an interesting counter claim to that, or a counterpart to that. Yes, the vulnerability was years old, so shame on the defenders for not patching it sooner. But why did it take attackers so long to actually exploit those vulnerabilities? And if we say that organizations or people are struggling with patching, then the fact that it takes attackers a long while to actually exploit those vulnerabilities means that there is some hope. That basically prioritizing vulnerability patching actually is something that you can do and that you can use, because it actually takes attackers or adversaries some time to develop the ability to exploit a vulnerability. And if you actually look at this closely, then you actually see that not all actors get access to an exploit at the same time. So that means that you can actually track the exploitability of a vulnerability in the underground. Now, don't get me wrong. Of course, the ideal scenario is that you always patch everything right away. As soon as a vulnerability becomes known and the patch is available, you apply the patch. There's basically nothing that beats that. That is the best approach. But if you can't do that because basically the workload is too big, then you can use the fact that it takes attackers a while to develop the ability to actually exploit, to kind of live in that window where, yes, the vulnerability is known, but we don't think they're exploiting it right now. So vulnerability intelligence actually focuses on that. We look at and we realize that vulnerability has a life cycle in the underground. It is discovered, then proof of concept code is developed. Usually this is done by the people who actually discover the vulnerability, and proof of concept code itself is not necessarily a kind of evil or bad in any way. It simply exists to prove that the vulnerability is real. Either the people who work on fixing the software product can use it to know what to fix and when the fix works. And for people running infrastructures or vulnerable products or components, they can use the POC code to check, are we really vulnerable? And after the fix has been deployed, has it really been fixed? So proof of concept basically doesn't do anything, but the weaponization stage means that you take that harmless proof of concept code and actually make it do something. And in that case, it becomes a skeleton key. It will fit a particular type of lock. That vulnerability, that weaponized proof of concept code allows you that exploit, allows you to exploit a very particular weakness. Now, the next stage is that the vulnerability is actually productized. Then it becomes part of, you think of it as Swiss Army knives of exploitation, software exploitation. The idea is you have a product. Metasploit, for instance, is a very good example that can try hundreds or thousands of different exploits on a target system. It will determine what kind of software it's running, see if it's got any exploits for them, and will try those exploits. So then once it's productized, an exploit will be used by many, many more actors because it's available to many more actors. So you can track an exploit as it makes its way through that cycle. You can track the chatter, the level of interests, which actors are interested in exploit, where they're expressing this interest, etc. And that helps you kind of determine what the exploitability of this vulnerability is like. So how does it help? Well, the first thing to realize is the aim is not to find popular exploits, because if you want to know which exploits are the most popular, all you have to do is look in your logs. And the reason this is not about popularity is very simply because if you have a component that is vulnerable to an exploit that is extremely popular, you're probably already too late. It's already been compromised. No, the idea is to find, and I am not sure what my slide did there, but the idea is to find vulnerabilities where something has changed in the ability of certain actors to exploit that vulnerability. And what that means is there weren't very many people, or no one was exploiting this last week, but something has now changed around this particular vulnerability. And next week, you're going to see an uptick, or next week or in the near future, you will see an uptick in the amount of people or the amount of exploit attempts that you will see to exploit this vulnerability. And that means that right now is the perfect time to patch that one. Or put it another way, if you're patching things, make sure that you're patching that as well, because otherwise you might be too late. So there is a change or an increase in the exploitation that is imminent. And that means it's a good time to patch and beat the actors. So that's just before that timer that kind of says when the timer ticks down to 0, someone will exploit that particular component just before the timer runs out. Now, again, you do this only when you need to prioritize. You do this only when that is necessary. If you have the luxury of patching everything, then please do. So we can use a couple of examples, and these are older examples, by the way, but tracking activity in the underground actually is a really reliable predictor of things happening. These are a couple of CVEs or common vulnerabilities affecting popular VPN products, Pulse Secure VPN and Palo Alto. They dated from 2019. In October of 2019, they were actually discovered kind of middle of 2019, and in October timeframe, both the NSA and GCSQ put out advisories warning organizations there's a massive wave of exploitation happening around vulnerabilities of VPN products, and that's not really surprising. like I said, a lot of actors, a lot of attacks start with gaining access to infrastructure. So anything that gives you access, especially vulnerabilities that you can exploit in legitimate remote access functionality, is extremely popular. So both those CVEs started to trend highly on our vulnerability intelligence between 1 and 2 months earlier, because we already saw an uptick in underground chatter and in actors becoming extremely interested in these vulnerabilities. So customers who were keeping an eye on those dashboards would have put patching those vulnerabilities high up on the list, and so we're beating the actual exploitation by about 1 to 2 months, which is a very nice situation to be in. So these are some use cases and some ways that you can use cyber threat intelligence. I want to kind of briefly finish up, and it's very brief because this topic is actually deserving and has had a couple of webinars of its own. But I wanted to briefly finish up with this about what is right for you, because these are all ways in which you can use cyber threat intelligence within your organization, ways with which you can help your stakeholders, but how you know which ones are right for you. So a very, very brief introduction of the GIR framework. And the purpose of that framework and that methodology is to help you ensure you're getting the most out of your CTI investments and your efforts. It's called the CUGIR methodology. It's a cyber threat intelligence methodology. It's actually based on the US Marine Corps' GIR methodology, which is also has to do with military intelligence. And the key question that the GIR methodology wants to solve is, how do you take kind of your limited resources that you have to collect, process, and develop intelligence and make sure that you're applying them to the maximum effect? And we took that approach and we kind of developed a version that works for the cyber underground. Central tenet there is basically intelligence requirements. Now, those are the central part of the methodology. So the idea that the CUGIR methodology allows you to identify your stakeholders, identify their use cases, and establish the kind of the list of intelligence requirements based on the use cases, the problems that these stakeholders are trying to solve. You can determine their intelligence requirements, which is the bits of intelligence they need to make the right decisions. And then based on those, on that prioritized list of requirements, you can build collection plans that will ensure that you're collecting the right bits of data, that you're developing the right intelligence to actually meet those requirements. So the CUGIR methodology allows you to establish clear goals, allows you to use your limited everybody always has limited resources. So you use your resources to maximum effect. You're able to measure how well you are meeting stakeholder requirements. You're able to adapt to changing requirements very quickly. You can basically make improvements to the way you run the CTI program to increase your the way in which you're meeting the stakeholder requirements. And finally, very importantly, it allows you to demonstrate the program's ROI. So this is a one-slide introduction to the CUGIR methodology. If you're interested in that, please look at our website. There's much more there. And now I know we're a couple of minutes over time. I'm going to finish up to summarize. Fundamentally, threats come from groups of actors working together in value chains. That means that actors are always trying to find good partners. And that means that they've built or that they create an underground which is limited in size and structured because it facilitates actors finding people to partner with, like a marketplace. That means we can monitor because it's limited in size and structured. We can map out the structure. We can identify the actors that are active. We can monitor actor interactions, and we actually track supporting infrastructure. That intelligence, that allows us to develop intelligence, which will help support decisions. That intelligence works both at all levels, at all parts of the cycle, both strategic, operational, and tactical, but also for prevention, detection, and response. Cyber underground intelligence has many uses across the multiple stakeholders: network protection, identity and access management, third-party risk, system integrity, security operation, risk and compliance, fraud prevention, to name a few. We went through a couple of tales from the trenches, or kind of use cases, interesting use cases of how customers are using this intelligence. to kind of solve real world needs. If you want to do that yourself, obviously you want to make sure that you're spending your resources, your money on the right things and getting the most bang from your buck. So a structured approach based on intelligence requirements ensures you can identify your stakeholders and their requirements, focus your resources for maximum effect, and measure your success and demonstrate ROI, and also deal with changing requirements as well. Now, all of this, and with the key purpose of CTI being to make sure that that you become more proactive when it comes to mitigating cyber risk. We've reached the end. I know we've gone a couple of minutes over. If there are any questions, you can either ask them after the end of the talk. If you come up with one afterwards, then please don't hesitate to reach out. And if you want to start being proactive today, you can do so. You can request a copy of our cyber threat report. The link is on the screen. And you can also request your own copy of our GIRs. And with that, I want to say thank you for taking the time to join our webinar. Thank you for allowing me to bend your ear and talk about how CTI can be useful. And we hope to see you again on one of our future webinars.